Welcome to Garden DC, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. This week on the Garden DC podcast, we're joined by returning guest Doug Oster. How have you been, Doug?
Doing great. I've had a great season. We've been very lucky with lots of rain.
That's wonderful to hear because we had about 3 weeks of drought here in the city of Washington, D.C., but around us, it seemed like everybody was getting rain but us. It was one of those goes right over north, goes right over south type of situations, which is so frustrating.
And as we're talking, there's a front coming through. And so if all of a sudden it goes black, I'll call you right back.
Okay. Yeah, same here. We're actually having a front of thunderstorms coming through. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. Great to have the rain, not so great to lose our electricity or internet connection, right?
Right.
So the last time you were on, we talked to you about tomatoes, everything about them from the earliest varieties to ripen to combating blight issues. And that was way back on our podcast episode 4. And a lot has changed since then, Doug.
Yeah, no doubt. At least things have opened up a little bit. I've been traveling,
Mm-hmm.
and but for me, over that period of time, it's just been wonderful because we've had this great season, and you forget how easy it is. You know, we had last summer we had a mild drought here in Pittsburgh, and that watering every day of the containers and all that. Then you remember how hard it is. Now it's like, gosh, gardening's fun. I really like it. Boy, this is great. You know, yeah, when it rains, it's it's easy.
Exactly. That's usually my hour a day spent watering is what could have been weeding, planting new things, dividing things, moving them around. Yeah, and it kind of is kind of soul sucking as well when you don't have rain.
No doubt about it. And I was gone for almost 2 weeks, but I kept getting reports that we're getting good rain. And you know how it is sometimes
Mhm.
when you're leaving on vacation, you never get everything done you want in the garden. And so I left things out there in pots that I just like, all right, well, I hope to see you when I get back. But if I don't, it was nice knowing you.
Yeah, I have that same system. I have a kiddie pool of the things I really want to keep alive. I'll put some water level in there and then kind of sit them in that. And then I'll have a neighbor who can hit some of the pots and things. And then the rest are kind of like, you're on your own, kid, survival of the fittest.
So I got lucky. Everything made it. And although I'm still playing catch up with the weeds, I actually had to take the string trimmer into the vegetable garden. It was that bad.
Man. Yeah, I think that's a lot of us. We were just in our vegetable plot a couple days ago, beating back morning glory vines that were trying to pull down our tomatoes and engulfing the zucchini as well. It's just crazy what 1 or 2 days away can do in the plot.
And it's just, this time of the year in the garden where everything is, you know, at its peak, and it's just so lush, and you can't see through the beds. You know, you've got 10-foot tall tomatoes and vines and lilies and everything. And it's just great.
Yeah, so that's why we wanted to make the theme of this episode summer bounty, especially in the vegetable garden. And everything is coming in now. I can't imagine going on vacation at this point, right? You just can't get away unless you just give somebody carte blanche to harvest from your vegetable plot.
The only thing worse is going on vacation in May. Actually,
Hmm.
that's pretty bad when you're right at planting time, when you have so much to do. But yeah, I agree. When everything's rolling in like this, you want to be here with all that work. You know, like we talked about when we did the last podcast, getting those tomatoes started and babying them along and making big plants and digging them deep and planting them horizontally, whatever it is, and then not to be here when the stuff comes in is not the way it should go.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and speaking of not being away in May, I always say I'll never see the Chelsea Garden Show in the UK because of that. Because that's exactly the height of our gardening season
Well,
here.
that's the what I'm talking about. Actually,
Hmm.
this will be my third trip this May, taking people there, and that's always the first thing that gardeners say is like, "Oh, it's such a difficult time to be gone," but the payoff is the Chelsea Flower Show is the Super Bowl of flower shows. One day you're going to have to go.
Hmm. Yeah, it's on my bucket list, but not soon. How's that?
All right.
In a few years. So, speaking of momentous events and things we have coming up, August 8th is, and let me get the exact name right, National Sneak Some Zucchini into Your Neighbor's Porch Day. So that was invented or started by Pennsylvanian Tom Roy, and it's to celebrate when you simply wait until the dead of night and quietly creep up to your neighbor's front doors, leaving plenty of zucchini for them to enjoy. So, is that a practice that you endorse, Doug?
No, the way we do it in Pittsburgh is if you stop at a stoplight for too long and you have your back window open, then you get a bag of zucchini. That's the way we do it in Pittsburgh. Maybe he's from the center of the state or over in Philadelphia, but that's the way
Yeah,
we do it here.
and you have to have a front porch to. The front porch part makes me think Philadelphia.
Hmm.
Makes me think of a front stoop, and you just kind of sneak it up there and then run.
One thing that's interesting, though, that I'm getting a lot of questions about, that's how zucchini used to be, but with pollinator problems, there are a lot of people that aren't getting zucchini like they used to.
Hmm.
Yeah, in my garden, there's a beehive in there, and so yeah, all these vine crops are going crazy. But I'm actually teaching people the birds and the bees. I'm telling them how to hand pollinate their vine crops because that some of them they're not getting they're not getting that huge amount of zucchini that they used to, and so that's something that I've seen over the last several seasons actually.
Yeah, I've started to share on our Twitter feed and Facebook page the photo of the female and male squash blossoms so people can be familiar with what they look like and then how they could pollinate them by hand. And some people are, very surprised that that first crop, it's usually what female flowers or all male flowers at the same time.
Right.
And if you don't have a neighbor somewhere close by, with zucchini at the same time or cucumber or whatever other squash at the same time, it's hard to get a good pollination going these days.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Do you recommend actually taking the flower off and like sticking it together? Sometimes I'll do that and kind of smush them together.
I say little itty bitty paintbrush, but you could do it either way.
Hmm. So usually I forget to bring a paintbrush out to the plot.
You don't have a paintbrush in your little tool thing?
No, I guess you could use a toothbrush or something else too.
Let's see, trowel, pruners,
Hmm.
toothbrush. I don't think so.
Mm-mm. So, do you find the same thing in tomatoes as well? I've heard people saying that their tomatoes are really slow to germinate and pollinate these days. So, that usually is self-pollinating, right? From the top flowers, kind of the pollen shaking and falling off into the lower flowers.
Actually, both male and female parts are in that flower. And so when the bee comes up to it, it's trying to get in and it's vibrating it. And so it's mixing that pollen that way. A lot of times in greenhouse growing, they'll use actually an electric toothbrush to simulate the bee, or they'll get bumblebees, to release in the greenhouse, and then out in the garden, a lot of times I tell people just give those plants a shake. That'll help. But we had a lot of blossom drop when it gets hot, especially with the bigger beefsteak heirlooms. When if they don't set early and it goes to like 86 and 92 and like that, they'll just drop their blossoms. They'll just say, I'm not even trying under this heat. And so I always tell people, for that type of plant, those beefsteaks that take, all summer to ripen, get them in, take your time, get them in though as soon as you can when it's safe, and that way at least they'll set some fruit for you. Because at this point they're going to start setting fruit, and if the tomato is a 90-day or even longer,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be pushing it when you get to, depending when you get your frost. The frosts have been slower and slower to come in the past several years, but you never know.
That very true. That you never know if we're gonna have an early frost or a late frost, but knock on wood, right there, that we have a late frost this year.
Was that your head you were knocking on? What was that?
That was my door.
Oh, okay.
But I'm looking at what zucchini I actually planted this year, the variety, and that's a Cocozella that I'm trying out, an heirloom one, and that is meant to be harvested at just 8 to 12 inches in length. But of course, some of the zucchini get away from you and become kind of baseball bat sized on up. What varieties are you growing this year, Doug?
So I have a patty pan out there. That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a huge zucchini grower, just because I like to. At first, I don't have full sun, and so vine crops can be tough for me. I'm growing, lots of beans, lots of pole beans and cucumbers, but I've got a patty pan out there, and I don't remember what it is. It's some kind of Italian heirloom, but it's filled with fruit again, because if you have bees in the corner of your vegetable garden, that's going to make all the difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And those like patty pan ones, like summer squash, are our favorites. And again, for a lot of Italian recipes, they're easy to process. But when you get that those baseball bat size, those are the kind when they stop too long at the stoplight that you just throw those in through the back window, even if it's open or even if it's closed, man, right through.
Even if it's closed.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
And those, I almost think that the local food pantries would be saying basta or stop after a while.
Actually, they'll take anything like that, and that's something that I'm always trying to get gardeners to do. There is a local pantry close to your house. It's at a church or something else. If you've got extra stuff, donate it, because they will appreciate it. And I know what you're saying. Like, not another zucchini, but that's not the way it is. I deal
Mhm.
with a couple of them here in Pittsburgh, and to be there when that stuff is available means the world to people. These are senior citizens. These are working poor. These are people they're working. They're working two jobs, but they don't make enough, and they need a little bit of help with this food. And it's like I said, seniors, kids, and families, working poor. There's not. It's even more exciting when the big tomatoes come in. When you see those big heirloom tomatoes dropped off at the food bank, that's a treasure. That's a treasure, because
Mhm.
a lot of that food has to be canned. That's the only way they can store it. So it's high sodium and high fat many times. So fresh vegetables, you know, uh, it's just so important. I'm always trying to get people, plant a little extra, give a little extra. It feels good.
Good point. And we just had our first gleaning at our community garden for the local harvest share, and we were able to donate a bunch of Swiss chard. I think that was the majority of what we gave at this point in the season. But in another month, it will definitely be tons of that summer squash and tomatoes and other things coming in. And I know that the local food pantry and the food kitchens, the chefs are really good at converting those to really nutritious and yummy meals. And speaking of converting them, and you mentioned your patty pan. So when you get a big crop in at once, and you're not growing acres, you're just growing,
No, no,
maybe a
my vegetable garden is 30 by 40, so there's
yeah.
one half of a little bed with some
Hmm.
zucchini running up a trellis.
But still, you get more than you can eat at once, and some you might donate. But some you might process to save. Do you shred it and put it in baggies to freeze? How do you process yours?
Everything out of my garden, no matter what it is, we eat fresh. We just figure out a way to use it. I love to cook. My wife loves to cook. And so there's really not much freezing or drying or any of that. It's just, I know it might seem like a lot. Like my best example would be tomatoes. And so you would say, how could you possibly use all those tomatoes? I could seriously eat 8 or 10 tomatoes a day, big tomatoes. That's how much I love them.
Sheesh.
And so for the squash, that would be up to the boss. She'd be the expert on the squash, but she'll turn it into something. Usually, add it with pasta. It's just everything we. That's just the way we do it. I don't know why. I could learn to can and I could freeze and this and that, but I whenever whatever season it is, like when the pole beans are just starting to come in, and we'll eat as much as we can, but then yeah, we'll, especially with pole beans, we'll be giving away bags, either to the neighbors or to you know the food bank.
Yeah, that's what I do too. Although this year I'm determined to blanch some and freeze some because last winter I was really missing some of that fresh produce from the garden.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. I can completely understand people canning and saving and drying and freezing. uh, I guess I'm too lazy, maybe. I don't know. It's just May, it's like today. I got 3 cucumbers today. That's like every day now, and so it's like, all right, well, I don't know. What do you want to do with it? I don't know. You want to peel them, or I'll eat them tonight, or who knows? It's the fun of summer.
And speaking of cucumbers and other vining plants, for some of our listeners who have maybe never grown zucchini or squash or cucumbers before, do you have any advice for beginners?
Especially for cucumbers, because cucumbers will break your heart when they get infected with bacterial wilt. Uh, Cucumber beetles are like these little green. They're either spotted or striped, little quarter-inch beetles. They'll nibble on the edges, and they don't do too much damage, but they infect it with a disease. And so I always tell people, and I do this with almost all my crops. Actually, it's called succession planting. And so for cucumbers, I'm in my zone 5-6. It's May 15 planting, May 30th planting, June 15th planting, and always growing them up off the ground. I find that by staggering those plantings, I always have better luck dealing with pests, diseases, and weather. When you plant it all at the same time, which that's the way I was taught to do it. Mom would march you out on Memorial Day and everything went in, and on Labor Day, everything went out. And so that's not the way I'm doing it now. And I know it might sound like a pain, like, oh, I just want to get my planting done. But if you do this, and like I said, I do it with almost everything. My last planting of tomatoes, and we talked about this before, was July 4th. And so staggering these plantings, it's made my garden more successful. And when you do plant all at the same time, you're just assuming that pest, disease, and weather will be on your side. And Kathy, I think from all your years spent gardening, that's never
Mm-hmm.
true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely great advice to span them out, space them out, and to be a little bit after is never a bad idea. I found, especially in a community garden when you're surrounded by other people doing the same thing. So when the eggplant beetles or squash vine borers come, they'll hit the first in the ground
Yep.
first. And then if you're a little bit of a procrastinator or a little late, a couple weeks behind, then they've moved on to somewhere else. So usually you can escape a lot of that issue.
And the other advantage is, we're in general pushing these plants into the soil a little early. When the soil's cool, when the weather is wet and rainy, if you do procrastinate a little bit and you do wait a little bit, many times you're giving the plant ideal conditions, a warmer soil and a warmer air temperature. Uh, and I find that I'm always telling people, you know, they're saying, like, you get to Memorial Day, like, well, I missed my opportunity again. I said, no, you might be doing the right thing. You might actually have better plants by planting later because of that, that warmer soil and warmer air temperatures. So no, keep planting, and I'm still planting. This is the lead up to my fall garden.
Mm-hmm.
Any bed that goes fallow needs to be planted right away. After the garlic comes out, bush beans go in,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what I can find. I got plenty of seeds, but I'm always looking for plants to get a jump on it. And believe it or not, in our climate here, Zone 5-6, the nurseries still have like big pepper plants and big tomato plants that you could just stick in a container. And why not? I mean, they're all filled with peppers, and you'll get those as they ripen. But if you get lucky, they'll start putting on more peppers, and you'll pick those at the very end of the season.
Very true. And starting with plants gives you a little bit of a head start late in the season. So
Hmm.
you could have had some, like we talked about, our driveway full of plants that didn't quite make it in the ground yet. Some of those might be able to be transferred over as well.
I still have a bunch of them out there that it's too it's too late for them. I threw a packet of carrot seeds into this flat that had lilies. I got to sprout somehow, and so there's there's a flat of carrots and lilies out there, and I don't know what the heck I'm gonna do with them.
Well, don't get them mixed up because I don't think those lilies will taste so good.
Oh, but they're gonna be beautiful.
Yep, but they'll be gorgeous. So, one beginner note I wanted to give on vining plants, especially zucchinis and cucumbers, is they're always surprised when they go to harvest their cucumber or zucchini how prickly the actual vegetable is. And the leaves are pretty prickly too, that you might want to wear gloves because when you go to the grocery store, they've been cleaned of those little prickles on there.
But isn't that the beauty of being a home gardener?
Hmm.
Those, especially for me with cucumbers. When I picked those 3 cucumbers today, there's nothing like it. There's that texture on there. That's from the home garden, and that's why when people, you'll always hear people like, "Oh, I could buy those for $1." Not these, not this fresh, not this
Yep.
size, not this type. That's the other thing I was going to mention. Grow lots of different things.
Hmm.
That's also a great strategy. Put 2 or 3 different cucumbers or zucchinis in, because you never know. One of them might turn out to be something you absolutely love and does good for you. There's always going to be something that just doesn't work for you. In my case, it's onions. I just don't have the right. I can grow garlic. I can grow bunching onions. I just can't grow big onions, and it's partially because of the sun, maybe because of the pH. I don't know, but there's always something. And believe me, I've worked hard at trying to do it. I think it's more sun than anything. I just don't have enough sun to get the biggest onions. I get onions, but they're laughable, and my wife likes to laugh at them. So
Tiny onions.
yeah,
That could be the name of your garden. Tiny
the
onions.
tiny onion garden. No, it's the huge garlic garden, Kathy.
Yes,
That's what
yes.
it is.
We'll celebrate our triumphs. So, speaking of varieties and planting different ones every year, do you have a specific varieties of cucumbers that you like? I'm partial myself to White Wonder. I just love the paler cucumbers.
I've grown a ton of them, and one I was really looking forward to and didn't get good germination on is one that my friend Jessica Walliser turned me onto called Silver Slicer. Uh,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and sometimes you'll add something to the garden because somebody that you respect as a grower, as a gardener, turns you onto it. And she actually gave me some seeds, but I must have done something wrong with them when I stored them because they didn't sprout. But that's enough to get it in my garden. I'm going to try it again next year. But some of the old-fashioned ones I like. County Fair. I love Diva. Diva is a newer one that it doesn't. I don't know what they call it. It has some kind of scientific name, but it doesn't need a pollinator. And so the other trick you can do on like a all female, and I'm not sure if technically they're all female, but they don't need a pollinator. And you could cover that with something called a floating row cover, and that would stop the beetle from getting to it. Sometimes when I have beetles really bad, I'll grow a variety like Diva. And then Marketmore 76 is another old fashioned one that I like. But and I also grow a lot of different picklers. It A lot of times I like to grow them from seed, but what it ends up happening is I end up like at a nursery, and I'm like, man, look at those. look at those plants, because they resent being transplanted, but that just means that knocks them back a week or two. Once they're in the ground, they'll take off again. Last year, I was speaking at a local nursery, and they had the most beautiful cucumber plants you ever saw, and I think they were all picklers. And I already had mine planted, but I couldn't resist. I had a big giant container that I just filled up with those cucumbers, and they just went everywhere. That's the other thing, Kathy. You got to talk about is
Hmm.
being a vine wrangler.
Especially your first time growing, and the packet might say something like 3 foot by 3 foot. Now, come on now. Even the dwarf little mini pumpkins, the little mini watermelons, they might be little mini plants, but they're going to vine as much as you allow them to.
Enough to cover the neighbor's house and the kids.
Hmm. You just have to keep kind of beating them back, guiding them back, and pushing them off the path and off of each other. That's another thing.
That's what I'm doing every day
Hmm.
now. Where the cucumbers are, I want to try. Most of my cucumbers I grow up, but I want to try. I said, I wonder if I can do them where they just kind of go on the ground, and then I can have peppers on top. But I'm spending all this time tearing the vines off the pepper cages, and like you said, pushing the vines off the path, and around we go. So, and I know what's going to happen too. It's going to become this jungle, and then at the end of the season, I'm going to have about 400 yellow cucumbers in there I never saw before that have grown and become. That's part of it. Although
Hmm.
that does drive me crazy. And I have a friend that has this just very tiny vegetable garden, and when I go over there at the end of the season, it's really nice because it's full sun and he compost galore, but he's got like that, they're in plain view, and I'm like, why isn't he picking those? They're just about gone.
Yep.
you know
Mm. And that's why I think I really am partial to the white varieties of cucumber or the paler ones because they're so much easier to spot under the foliage. So same thing with pole beans. I like the varieties that are purple potted. Um, and I can spot them so much easier and not have to pick up every single leaf and inspect under everything to find those, errant little beans or cucumbers.
I did grow, and I haven't grown it in a couple of years, and you reminded me of it. It's called Hamong Red, and it's from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, and it's a yellow cucumber, and it gets huge, but it doesn't get bitter. And that was one I really loved. I need to grow that again. And then, I want to tell you, pole beans. I grew one last year for the first time, and I'm growing it again this year, called Monte Gusto. And man, oh man, all I did was throw a packet of seeds behind some garlic. I didn't even put them in right. The soil was good, but I was like, man, I got to get these in, and this is the only place. And kind of pushed them in the soil and crossed my fingers. We had more pole beans than we could possibly use. And like I said, we use everything fresh. I had big,
Hmm.
giant, gallon Ziploc bags. Anybody, anybody and everybody who loved beans, who would want to eat some fresh beans, could get some.
And how do you like to eat your pole beans? Do you fry them up? Do you just blanch them? How do you prep yours?
Yeah, blanch, steam, garlic and butter.
That's a good
Garlic,
one.
more garlic the better. Everything has to have garlic in that I cook. Everything.
Yum, I love garlic too. I like my beans. I like to fry up some eggs, like scramble the eggs and throw the beans in there after they've been blanched. Do you ever do that?
That sounds good though.
And then you put Parmesan cheese on top.
Wow.
Super, super, super good.
I'm gonna have to
That's a
come over for breakfast one of these days.
yeah, it's either a good breakfast or brunch or a hearty lunch
There you go.
for those, but that's really good. So I was looking up the Hamong red, and yeah, that is a striking cucumber. That's a
And
really
and the
cool
thing
one.
about it was that when it gets too big, it doesn't get bitter or hard to eat. I mean, it gets huge and it's still as tender as the smaller ones. Which that's the other thing about cucumbers. I guess we should have talked about. Once they start
Hmm.
to get big and they start to make seeds, they do get bitter. The skin gets tougher. So I'm always picking all that stuff. Zucchini, cucumbers. I'm always picking small, even though you want to come in from the garden and show people, like, look, I can grow exactly the same size as what's in the store. I've accomplished something. But they're so much better when they're smaller, especially those pickler cucumbers. A lot of times they'll just set fruit and get 2, 3 inches, and you know how it is. I'll just eat them in the garden.
Very true to pick on the small side and, not to wait till they get tough or too big. And that reminds me of the fact that zucchini actually means little squash in Italian, like baby squash, and we're growing them way too big. We should be harvesting them, much smaller than we are.
They're so much better. You're tender and sweet, and yeah, just pick them early, and that kind of forces the plant to make more. Also, what
Mhm.
most plants want to do is they want to grow and flower and put on seeds, and cucumber or squash is a seed delivery system, and then go to sleep. So if you pick those off before they start to swell and everything, the plant's like, I didn't make my seeds, I got to make more fruit.
And same thing can be said for peppers. So if you're growing, say, a sweet pepper, do you pick at the green stage or do you wait for yellow or orange or red, depending on the variety?
I almost always try to wait until it colors up.
Hmm.
I love whatever the pepper is, whether it's a hot or a sweet one. I love when it's reached that point where it's mature. And man, I had some hot Hungarian wax the other day, and I was like, well, how could it be? I'm growing lots of hot peppers. And they were hot enough to wake you up, I'll tell you. And because they had changed color, they had turned all the way red, and so they're completely finished. And even after cutting the flesh and seeds out, uh, I was hurting.
Yeah, I'm not a big hot pepper fan, but I love the sweet peppers, and I'll eat them at any stage. From green onwards. But I do know people who are super picky that they want them all the way sweet, sweet, sweet.
I just love that. There's something about them when they turn red, uh, with the flavor for me. And the same is true for hot. You
Mm-hmm.
know, one of the reasons that like hot pepper fanatics like me, when that hot pepper gets mature, and I'm talking about much hotter than Hungarian hot wax, the flavor is, you got to take the pain, but the flavor that is just amazing. It's just that fruity flavor, and you can't eat a lot of it, but every year my friends come over. I get all these hot peppers, and I mean super hot ones, and we cut out all the seeds, cut out all the flesh, fry them up. When you fry them up, it's like tear gas in the kitchen. And we sit there and we have them like, start at the least and go to the hottest, and just have a little piece of each, just because you can say, like, oh, yeah, I've eaten a Carolina Reaper. It's not like you've taken an entire Carolina Reaper and ate it off the stem. You've taken a little slice of a Carolina Reaper with no seeds or flesh that's been cooked down, and then you're drinking milk and bread, eating bread, and doing anything you can to stop the fire.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a hard pass on that,
I
Doug.
don't blame you. I don't blame you, but it is so much fun.
But I'll definitely like to be there to watch.
It's not as bad
So,
as you would think.
mhm.
Maybe if we were 20 years younger, it would be bad, but we're smart enough to be like, let's start with a little bit and go from there. I remember the first
Mhm.
time that I ever had a ghost pepper, and my son and I both, since he's been a little boy, we have both embraced hot peppers. And so we were really excited. Okay, ghost pepper. This is when they first were a big deal. And he's always the one that has to eat it first. I'm quite a dad. It's quality time, Kathy. Quality time. And he just took a sliver off the tip, uh, and ate a little bit of it. He said, "It's hot, but it's not that bad." 1 millimeter closer to the stem of the pepper was painful. Very, very painful.
Mm.
So that's some fun hot pepper stories for you folks out there.
So, well, let's turn to how about some heartbreaking plants in the vegetable garden. So we talked a lot about our bounty and some of the things that we've had successes for, but I'm thinking in particular of two groups that I was going to ask you if you've had success with. The first is eggplant, and then the second is corn. And I find both of them to be challenging myself for different reasons. And so let's start with eggplant. Are you a big eggplant grower, Doug?
I think they're beautiful, as long as you can handle the, flea beetle damage. I mean, you're always unless you're nuts about it, you're always gonna have flea beetle damage on,
Mm-hmm.
eggplant. It looks like a shotgun, was fired.
Yep.
And so, to me, growing an eggplant is about like growing a tomato, or a pepper. Uh, in my garden, they grow about the same. Now, corn, forget it. And in my old garden, I grew corn and we did okay with it, but it takes up so much space. It's a heavy feeder. It's wind pollinated, so it has to be set in kind of a block instead of rows. Uh, that one you need a lot of space. And then I was at a community garden doing a story, and of course the gardener only visits every once a week. He had 12-foot tall corn stalks with giant ears of corn on them. Every ear was opened and stripped by raccoons. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
100 ears. A raccoon will come one night and say, not ready yet. Come back the next night, almost there. And then right before you pick it, there goes your corn. So the corn is a heartbreaker. What about you for eggplant? Are you having trouble growing them?
It's the flea beetle
Yeah,
damage.
yeah,
They just, will strip the foliage and you got a very unattractive looking plant. Of course, you can still get some nice eggplants. I find the new dwarf or patio sized eggplants much easier, like the Gretel, the container size. And like we said earlier, procrastinating or planting later in the season
yeah.
helps you a bit. But you only get a few fruits, few eggplants from each plant, so you need several if you want to make something decent, like an actual tray of eggplant parmesan. So the one or two little baby eggplants not going to do much for you.
Yeah, and they're just kind of they're very beautiful. That's kind of what I
Hmm.
like them for in the garden. But I guess if you were really like if eggplant was your thing and you really wanted to grow good eggplant, probably the best way to do it would be under a floating row cover from beginning to end, um, or open it up for pollination, just to try and keep as many of those flea beetles off as possible. The downside to that might be you cover those with a floating row cover and the flea beetles are already in there. Now
You've tented them inside.
yes, you've made a
Yeah,
you
yeah.
made a bad situation even worse.
That's what I did last year was just containers of the mini eggplants covered in, it looked like a row of ghosts in my plot. So they did okay, but it was a lot of work for, not that much result
I think the
for.
heartbreaking thing for me are the critters that that somehow get through that fence. My vegetable garden is fenced, picket level, but with chicken wire all the way around it, buried in the ground. No matter what I do, you know, especially early in the season when the small rabbits that can get through that chicken wire, they can devastate those early beans, and
Mhm.
cole crops and lettuce and all the things that you're so excited early in the season. I love to grow year round, and that early part of the season is so exciting to me because anything that wintered over is going to go nuts. And then putting in all those cool weather crops, it's just you're getting started, and it's just that renewal of spring. uh, and then the next morning you fattened up a rabbit, then he can't get out, and then what do? So fat he can't get out the fence.
Yep. The baby bunnies are so cute, but they are so frustrating mowing down the pole beans just as
Yep,
they've germinated. Like they don't wait till it's bean stage, they mow down the whole plant.
yep.
Uh, but that's exactly why I was saying corn is the most frustrating along with eggplant because there is not one creature who does not like corn.
Hmm.
I can't think of one creature that if they could get to that ear of corn would not eat it. So everything is going after it, from deer to crows, anything that could get into your plot is going to attack that corn. So you just have to know that starting off.
I
And then as small space gardeners, if you have corn growing near you at a neighbor, so you're an urban or small space, then you have to worry about what they're growing because if they're growing, say, field corn or popcorn, and you're growing Silver Queen, you're not going to have Silver Queen when you finish and harvest it.
I've seen people grow corn where it's in a cage. It's like it's like a corn death match, where it's completely covered so the raccoon can't get to it because there is nothing like the homegrown corn. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we have great corn from our farms, but the old story is that when you grow your own corn, as you walk out to pick it, you've already got the water boiling, because as soon as you pick it, the sugars start to convert to starches. And so it's just like most other things, only the home gardener can have the very best corn. And so I think that's why so many people enjoy growing it. But boy, you need a lot of space and a lot of patience, and maybe even a shotgun.
Yep, pack your patience for sure. So you were saying you don't have too much sun in your plot, and I'm sure you're having your peppers and tomatoes in the best sun locations. So I was going to ask if you grow okra, but it sounds like you don't have space for it there.
I've grown it in the past. It's just not one of my. I don't know much about it. I just grew it.
Mm-hmm.
I grew it early on, just as like, oh, okra, this would be kind of cool. And I actually just talked to a guy, via social media, and I was asking him about it, and what do you use it for? He goes, oh, I thicken up my gumbo. I'm like, that makes sense. That sounds like okra.
I just love growing okra because it's a beautiful plant itself. So you basically have a hibiscus relative with these beautiful flowers, and then you get some vegetables out of it too. To me, they taste like green beans when you strip them straight from the plant and eat them raw and fresh in the garden. And like you said with corn, you want to eat them right away. Because the sugars, and if you wait a day or two, they start to get tough and yucky. And so even ones you get at the farmer's market is not the same as ones picked straight from your plot and put on your table.
Yeah.
And I was going to also say that okra needs a fair amount of square footage, but because it's so vertical, that it's a great one for putting something else underneath it. So you could have your pole beans underneath, you could have your pumpkins underneath. So it's one that it looks like it will take up a lot of real estate, but really doesn't.
I had a friend that grew one that was burgundy, and she just loved it. She thought it was one of the most
Hmm.
beautiful plants in her garden.
Yeah, and they can be dried and saved and used for crafts and other things. So it's a fun plant. The one thing about okra, similarly to zucchini that we were talking about earlier, is you do not want to go away for a couple days and miss that harvest because it gets woody almost immediately.
Mm.
So after 2 or 3 days, you just have to strip those little okra horns off and then start again because you are not going to eat those.
How about beets?
Beets. I am not a fan of beets at all. Even though I love other vegetables, I've never gotten into beets. How about you, Doug?
I hated them when I was a kid,
Mhm.
because there were those canned beets, and I was just growing them for my wife, actually, because she loved beets. And once I got those garden beets out, though, and she roasted them, I'm a beet lover. I actually had I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I had this program called All We Were Saying Is Give Beets a Chance, where I had people singing that on a video. And because I was a guest on a radio show, and they were reading this news clip about a new organic garden being at the White House. This was under the Obama administration. And the last line in the uh, news release was, but there will be no beets in the White House garden because the president doesn't like beets. And then, they introduced me, and the first thing I say is, we must have beets in the White House garden. And it just started this whole crazy program. It ended up that my book publisher met two gardeners from that garden at Mance, actually. This is a trade show that Kathy and I see each other at in Baltimore. And he said, you got to meet this guy. He's got this whole beets thing to get beets in the White House garden. And so he got their card, and I sent him a DVD of the video. It's on YouTube. If you search "Give Beets a Chance," you can see this silly video. And then I sent 2 packets of seeds, and they sent me a letter back and just said, it's no big deal. We're just going to put some beets in the White House garden. No one will know the difference. But I always like to say that I change public policy.
Well, I've definitely grown beets, even though I don't eat them, and I usually that's what I'll give to a food bank or kitchen and
Here,
try to
everybody, here's the stuff I don't like.
exactly, and push them off, but, that's only just to have the experience of saying, "I grew beets and they look beautiful."
There
I
you
will
go.
say that. I will say that, cut open for, laying on the counter even, there is the staining factor, though, that people need to be a little bit cautious about. So, if you have marble countertops, don't set your beets down on those marble
There's
countertops.
one called Chioggia,
Mhm.
and it's named after an Italian fishing village. It's an 1800s heirloom, and when you cut it open, it's white flesh with pink concentric rings that look like a target. That is a cool one.
Mhm.
That's a good one to try and get kids into beets, and Kathy too.
Yeah, you can try.
Roasted with goat cheese. I'm trying to think what else we can pour on that beet that you could choke it down.
Maybe a lot of garlic and butter.
There you go.
Then I might be able to. So, any other vegetables that you're growing? Sweet potatoes, turnips, starches?
No potatoes this year. I'm trying to think what else. Well, lots of greens.
Mhm.
Trying to think if I gotta have something weird out there. Well, I'm growing a grain, and I don't even know how to pronounce it. This is the second year I've grown it. Something like huazontal. And a lot of times I'll find seeds in catalogs, and there's a cool catalog. It's called J.L. Hudson Seedsman. There's no pictures in it, and I love it. And I found this stuff in there, and just the description was it's like a you know grown way down south, Mexico or someplace, and it makes this grain. It's easy to grow, but they would take it's like a big red thing of grain, kind of look like an amaranth, but you're supposed to batter it and then deep fry it, eat it that way. But the foliage tastes like spinach. It grows like a weed, and then it says it's that beautiful grain on there. And actually, I gave some to it was the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden. They have like an edible area in a kid's garden, and I was just up there, and it's looking great. And again, something I like to grow stuff that's a lot of times weird and different, just to see what it's like. And like I said, the foliage tastes like spinach. It grows without any help from the gardener, and then it has this beautiful red kind of grain seed heads they don't need to be deep fried. I was eating them all sorts of different ways. I was eating them out in the garden. They were good.
Hmm. We'll have to have you spell that for us, Doug.
Can I look? Should I look it up?
Yeah, if you
All
can
right.
look it up. And it's not Malabar spinach,
No,
so that
no, no,
sounds
no, no. This
similar.
is something. This is completely different. Let me see. You keep talking, and I'll see if I can get this to work.
So, speaking of Malabar spinach, that one's one that needs full sun to take off for you. But it is a green that you can grow in hot, humid summers. So, when your other greens, your spinach, your arugula, your regular lettuces have kind of petered out or bolted, then that's a great time to have Malabar spinach in the garden.
Here's the spelling:
Okay.
Huauzonttle. How would you say that? Huazontal, I think.
Hutzitl? Yeah, interesting. Well, definitely have to check that out and maybe get some seeds to try that
And
out next
there's a
year.
couple different common names I'm looking right now. Red
Mhm.
Aztec spinach, it's sometimes referred to.
Ah.
It says ancient grain. And anyway, when I got these seeds and I thought nobody else in the world would be growing this. Well, of course, as soon as I started searching it, I found all these farmers that were growing it because it was such a great food crop and so easy to grow. And so it's just tucked into corners and they let it do its thing. And so I've been playing around with it. And those are the kind of things I like to give to other gardeners too. Like, here, try this because it's so out there. Uh, one of the real fun parts for gardening for me is finding just strange things like that. Even that Hamong red cucumber, in your case, white wonder cucumber for many people would be unusual, but just growing different stuff and experimenting with it and seeing if it's something you love, and just there's something about having a, a whole field or a whole bed of white cucumbers, man. That just has a different look to it. When someone comes to my garden, they see that red grain, they're like, "What is that thing?" And you spend, in my case, it's been 30 years I've been gardening, and well, longer than that, but 30 years writing about gardening. But there's always just something new. You can never get to all of it, and that's one of the beauties of gardening, of just this exploration. Every time you kind of turn a corner, you find something new and cool, and you might become a new obsession for you. You know how garden obsessions are, right?
Yep. And new and cool is the name of the game. That's us, right, Doug?
Yeah. Well, old, and yeah, new and cool. You're right.
We'll claim it. All right. Let my listeners know, Doug, how they can follow you on YouTube and all your new endeavors.
Just start at dougoster.com. Everything's there. If you just search Pittsburgh and gardening, I'll come up too. But I answer all my garden questions. That's the first thing I want to say. Part of my job is helping people garden. And when I do answer those garden questions, many times I can get a story out of it. I love talking to other gardeners and seeing what they're doing and seeing what they're having success with, and hearing their stories on how they got into gardening. Garden people are just the best people. When you think of like social media and haters and trolls and all this stuff, I don't get that. I don't have it. It's just, we're all talking about gardening and having fun talking about it and helping each other. I always say that gardeners, they're not like fishermen. They share their secrets. and that's true, because gardeners like to help other people succeed.
Any last thoughts?
Keep planting, have fun. Plants die. That's part of it. When anything ever dies in your garden, all you have to say is that something must have happened to it before I got it, because that's what I always say.
Good one. Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you, Kathy. That was fun.
Plant profile, zinnia. Zinnias are colorful summer annuals that are practically carefree and a great choice for beginner gardeners. The zinnia is a rewarding plant, especially for those of you who have never started flowers from seeds before. Rewarding is an understatement, actually. In a typical summer, I have picked 10 bouquets of flowers from my small zinnia patch by early July. The bees and butterflies love them too. I am often culling my blooms right out from under the insects with a quick sorry as I run off to put them in a vase. To start zinnias from seed, clear off a patch of soil in a sunny area of your garden. Here in the humid mid-Atlantic U.S., good wind circulation is a must, as zinnias are vulnerable to powdery mildew, so make sure they are out in the open and not next to a brick wall or tall shrubs. Scratch a few lines in the ground and then sow your seeds according to the package instructions. Water them in well. If it doesn't rain consistently, you may have to give them supplemental water, but usually they're fine without it. The only other care note is to have your floral snips handy, as once they start blooming, you'll want to pick them practically daily. The more you cut, the more flowers they produce. And it's not too late in this growing season. Last year, I didn't start my zinnia seeds until early August, and I was picking flowers by the end of September, and they kept on producing throughout October. Zinnias, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, first, a big thank you to new listener supporter Ashley Madison. Thanks, Ashley. If you'd like to become a listener supporter too, just go over to anchor.fm/GardenDC/support and fill out the form. Over at our community garden plot, the big news is the Castendale bush beans that I got from seeds from Renee's Gardens are already producing a crop. And I say already because it was exactly 42 days prior that I planted the seeds in the ground. And I think that is a record, at least for my garden, for bush beans. So very grateful and happy to have that harvest already coming in. And over at my home garden, daylilies are still looking beautiful. The hydrangeas are going on and on and on and producing lots of bouquets for me. So very happy with the midsummer garden. Echinacea coneflowers still looking great. Black-eyed Susans are pretty much the highlight everywhere because they are popping up little yellow exclamation points all over my garden. And in the local garden world, I want to urge everyone to get over to downtown Frederick, Maryland, if you're in the DC area at all or in the region, to walk along the Carroll Creek Park. It is magnificent right now. All the water lilies are in bloom. They have several lotus and other water garden plant selections in there, and it is just a beautiful highlight for the summer season. And there are nearby shops and restaurants to patronize as well. Just a great day outing to do for the summertime. And in local garden events, we have the Washington Gardener Garden Photo Show opening reception on Sunday, August 1st from 2 to 3:30, and that's open to the public and anybody who wants to attend. After that opening reception, the photos will remain on exhibit in the Meadowlark Botanic Gardens Visitor Center lobby through August 30th. So if you missed the reception, you can still come by anytime to view those winning garden photos. And I encourage you to do so, even if you saw them in our magazine or online, because in person, the detail is just spectacular, and it's nothing comparison to seeing from digital to in person these beautiful photos that our area photographers have taken. And another local event I wanted to draw your attention to is Grow Your Own Microgreens, and this is from friend of the show, Cultivate the City. That's taking place Saturday, August 7th at 11 a.m. at their headquarters on Bladensburg Road Northeast in Washington, D.C. So if you've always wanted to grow microgreens, this is a fun time to attend. The ticket includes some take-home microgreen seeds, and you can find out how easy it is to grow your own healthy and nutritious microgreens in your very own kitchen. Happy gardening, everyone! Thank you for listening to Garden DC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to anchor.fm/gardendc/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to washingtongardener.com. Thank you. You can find Washington Gardener online at washingtongardener.com, on Twitter at WDC Gardener, on Instagram at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook.com at Washington Gardener Magazine.